presentation is on how gonzo journalism changed the definition of ethical journalism as we know it from various accepted practices and accepted ethical values as put forth through the New York Times and Kovach and Rosenstiel, as we'll see in a second. So gonzo journalism, which also can be considered immersionist journalism, it's proven to be a turning point in media consumers' expectations of of journalists. So basically what consumers expect of journalists in terms of ethical guidelines and in terms of coverage, which has significantly changed over the past 10 years. So basically what I'm basing my research off of is the elements of journalism as put forth by Kovach and Rosenstiel that was put out in 2001. And it's really hard because journalism is so fluctuating that there's no set rules for it, but these are a good generally accepted practice. Nothing's the end-all be-all. Obviously it's an art, so you can't have super rigid rules, but these are a good embodiment of what most journalists follow. I'm also going from Ethical Journalism, a Handbook of Values and Practices for News and Editorial Departments, which was put forth by the New York Times, which is obviously a very well-respected ethical newspaper that works as hard as it can not to have a bias, but obviously it does. Everything does. And then I also was going off What's Gonzo About Gonzo Journalism by Jason Mosser, which was just kind of a literary study about what is gonzo journalism, where does it come from, what embodies it, etc. So gonzo journalism came from Hunter S. Thompson, who is actually the namesake for gonzo journalism because his sort of alter ego, I don't know, it's a lot of different things, but gonzo is sort of his alter ego. Just to give you sort of a feeling for who Hunter S. Thompson is, I pulled up this video because he it was a really big personality, especially in the journalism world in the late 60s and early 70s, or throughout the 70s. So I was just going to show you this quick video. It's from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is his biggest work. I didn't use it as a source because it's more literary, a little bit exaggerated. It's not very reliable of a source, but it's one of his most famous works. So we'll just watch a minute of this or so.
Kevin, can you close the door, please?
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
Okay, so that's just a little clip. That's obviously Johnny Depp. He does a really good interpretation of Hunter S. Thompson and who he was as a person. So that scene is pretty much adapted straight from the book. It's almost word for word. So that's sort of his style of writing. You can get sort of a feel from that. It's very literary. They talk a lot about drug and alcohol use, although Hunter S. Thompson came out later and said that most of it's exaggerated, but still it kind of pushes the boundaries for ethical journalism. But Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas as a piece was actually published in the Rolling Stone. Hunter S. Thompson actually thought he was going to get fired for it, but it turned out to be one of his biggest works. So then this next clip here you can read. I won't read it for you, but that's from another work of Hunter S. Thompson's called The Kentucky Derby as Decadent and Depraved. He basically just went to the Kentucky Derby completely high on acid and completely drunk and everything and reported on it, and that was just kind of who he was as a person. That's what he's known for. So obviously all of that pushes the bounds of ethical journalism, but Hunter S. Thompson is still well respected as a journalist for his less literary works, less ridiculous things, such as his Hell's Angels report, where he actually lived among the Hell's Angels, bought a motorbike, lived with the Hells Angels, befriended them for over 2 years, and then ended up writing like a 250-word report on it, which is like extremely well respected. It criticized the Lynch report, which is a large like legal report published about the Hells Angels, which turned out to be very exaggerated, and Hunter S. Thompson sort of like busted that open. And he also did Fear and Loathing in the Campaign Trail, so he did a lot of well-respected journalistic works. So modern gonzo journalism is actually practiced a lot, especially in pop culture for millennials. One of the companies that does a lot of gonzo journalism and immersionist journalism is Vice Media, which you guys may have heard of. The founder, Shane Smith, said this quote, "We try not to be too intrusive, we try to be smart about it." So obviously they're not taking acid and going to cover stories, but it's the same concept as Fear and Loathing, as Hunter S. Thompson, because they're going straight to, you know, like the heart of the crime or the heart of the situation, and they're actually immersing themselves in the story. So just really quick, we don't have to watch the second video, but the first one is a really good example of gonzo because, well, you'll see.
Hi, I'm Thomas Morton. We're here in the sewer system of Bogota, Colombia, a place where for the past 30 years, the city's kind of lower rungs, street kids have sought refuge from the right-wing death squads, which fairly regularly patrol the city above. In the late 80s, kind of the height of the epidemic of street kids here, small business owners and kind of the wealthy elite started raising death squads to help rid their property of what they thought as disposables, process which they cheerfully called social cleansing. One of the only people in Colombia to help the sewer children, Dr. Jaime Jaramillo, has pulled thousands of kids out of the pipes. But at the same...
So as you can see, he's reporting on death squads in the sewers of Colombia who are killing the untouchables. So instead of just kind of like following the traditional path and maybe interviewing a victim, maybe interviewing an official, he could have just interviewed this refugee guy. Instead of that, he went straight to the heart of the problem. He went to the sewers. He basically risked his life because he's not lying. Like, people go down there, they set fire to the people down in the sewers because they truly believe they don't deserve to live. So I just wanted to show you guys just this one part that really kind of embodies the type of journalism that I'm talking about. This is him in the sewers of Colombia.
Fucking stepping off into the abyss here. It's starting to get really slippery. The smell, like, I feel like it gets exponentially worse with every step. Right now we're at, like, County Fair, Porta-John. This is just shit. Probably shouldn't be touching the wall. So right here, this keeps going. How long's it been since it rained? A month ago. It was a month. And it's like we're shin deep. Were there people in it? Yeah. How many?
Like, over there, like 20, I think, on the other side.
How far?
Like 10 minutes.
So we're right at the point where it's no longer safe.
And it's not good to stay very long here.
People could come. I can't see. Can you kill the light for a second? Can we just... Because, like, nobody comes here with flashlights. So... Jesus Christ. This is... Like, I can barely, like... I just want to see how long before my mind starts swimming.
Okay, so as you can see, he's going into the sewer, he's checking it out, he even turned off the light, he's describing the smell, he's describing the atmosphere of what these people do every day. Like, these people live down here. So as you can see, he kind of immerses himself in the story, he turns off the light to see what it would be for them, and he kind of is putting himself in a lot of danger. So that just kind of goes to show that, like, consumers, like, this is like the more extreme side, but consumers are beginning to expect this of journalists, because at the same time as this, if you look at the New York Times, all of the foreign reporters, anybody who's covering the Middle East, anybody who's covering Gaza, anybody who's covering Syria, they're actually 9 times out of 10 living in that area. So consumers have come to expect that of journalists. So obviously this creates some ethical discrepancies, particularly in terms of the New York Times says a lot about not befriending your sources, not becoming too reliant on your sources, just because it can create a bad image of favoritism or friendship. But as you can see in the clip that we just watched, Thomas Morton, the journalist, had to sort of like put his life in the hands of his source because that person knew the sewers and he didn't. So that's a little bit of a blurred line in terms of ethics. Also, yeah, just personal relationships with sources is a big one for the New York Times especially. Neutral reporting is a big topic discussed in The Elements of Journalism by Kovach and Rosenstiel. Basically, they encourage neutral reporting. They explain that basically no story can be completely neutral because as human beings we'll always just have natural like predispositions to a certain side, or obviously we have an opinion on the subject, but it's hard to appear neutral when you're putting kind of your life in the hands of your source. So there's a few ethical discrepancies there, and this definitely changes journalism because modern practice has very much changed from the ethical and journalistic guidelines put forth in the past 10 years. Both of my sources are within the past 10 years, and even now they're not completely irrelevant because they're good guideline. Like I said, there can't be any rigid rules or completely rigid guidelines that every journalist needs to follow because every story is different, but it is almost rendering the elements of journalism and the ethics of journalism as put forth by the New York Times and Kovach and Rosenstiel irrelevant or needing to be rewritten. So as you can see, more is expected from journalists, resulting in more in-depth stories. Journalists are more and more putting themselves at risk, going to the Middle East, getting beheaded in some cases, putting themselves in danger for the sake of the story. And then there's mine.